Thank you, Marla, and welcome everybody. I think this will be a good webinar. We're covering a probably very interesting topic to everybody that uses Donman, which is deduping. And we're going to look at virtually every aspect of deduping within Donman. We're going to start off with interactive duplicate checking. We're going to talk about how Donman checks for duplicates as you enter a new name onto the system, because that's one of the most important things. When you add a new person into the system, you want to make sure that person isn't already there, so that you're adding their donations or adding information to someone who's already there and appending to it, rather than creating a duplicate, which will then mean duplicate mails and problems later on down the track by various people who don't want to get multiple mails for good reason. And Gary Lincoln will be taking us through that, and also showing you a sneak preview of the new deduping by email address, which is going to be in the next service pack. Then Murray's going to take over and talk about duplicate checking, which is what happens after you put someone on. You've got all your donors on, you've got your donor file, but then you think, well, maybe I've got some duplicates in there. I'd like to actually run through and see, are there any duplicates? And so Murray will take you through all of that. Then I'm going to take over and look at, what do you do if you've got a text file? You've got a text file and you want to actually use that to mail or do something, but you want to make sure that those names on the text file aren't already in the donor file. So we've got programs that will check that text file against your donor file, and when I say the donor file, it'll also check against the archive file, the prospect file, the mailing address file, and see, are there any duplicates. And generally these programs will then divide your file into two files, a file of matches and a file of non-matches. And I'll also show you some other specialized versions of the text file deduping. Finally, appeal selection deduping. Okay, we're going to do an appeal. We're going to run an appeal. We've done many selections, and we're going to make sure we haven't made a mistake, that we're not going to send the same person two different appeal letters because we haven't really been careful enough in our selection. So what can we do to make sure this doesn't happen? And Murray will take us through that and show how we can dedupe selection files. So now I'm going to hand it over to Gary and get him to go through the interactive duplicate checking.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning, everybody. What we're going to look at initially is, if I'm putting a new donor onto the record, onto the system, normally what I would do to make sure I don't have a duplicate is to use multi-find. But there are certain cases where you still need to put a record in, and this system by default will check for duplicates as we enter a new record. So on my screen at the moment, where I've got a new donor record, as per normal, I'll just enter, get my next number, and from there I start entering my new record. As I enter down and I get down to the suburb and the postcode, the system will then at that point check for a duplicate for me automatically. If I start typing in my person here, and if you've got the rat tool, that'll pop up like this one has. Okay, so if I said it's in Boolean and in Ralph Street, number 1, transfer that back to my donor record. So as I enter through now, and I get to the postcode, you'll see the system has automatically done a duplicate check for me at that point. So if I say yes, it will come up and show me there's possible duplicates of people with similar names. Okay, it doesn't necessarily need to be Smith, it could be Smythe or anything that sounds similar to that. And they're basically in the same suburb of the same postcode, because you can have multiple suburbs in a particular postcode. If I said no, that's not true, and I now put in the email address, which is something that will come out in the next update, that if I put Smith at okay, so what is being built into the system at the moment is, if I put an email address in, the system will also check for a duplicate record based on the email, because email are obviously becoming something much more common that we are using nowadays, whereas in the past we haven't. So if I say yes, I'm now getting the same people, because in this case those records have all got the same email address. Okay, so there's basically how the system will do that duplicate checking for me. Behind the scenes, how the system does the duplicate check, based on the name and the characters in the name, the system will create another code called SoundX, which is a set algorithm basically that the system will utilize to create a code that says that this name sounds like this. So basically, in this case, it'll have Smith and it'll have some numbers after that, which will, if I put another Smith in or a Smythe or something similar, and it's in the same postcode, the system will automatically bring up those duplicates for me. If perchance you are getting some very strange duplicates coming up and you're saying, well, that doesn't match at all, under the Modify History Archive menu, there is a bulk utilities menu, and on that menu there is an option to go through the whole system and regenerate the sort keys, indexes, check buttons, absolutely everything on your data. So if perchance you are getting some very strange duplicates and say, look, they're not even close, there's something wrong, it could mean that we really need to update the soundex and the sort keys on all the data. So that's something that, because it's fairly easily done, and if you import a lot of data, that probably wouldn't be a bad thing to do as well. So pretty much that's what happens at the time we enter a new record, and the duplicate check will happen automatically. Of course, if people say, no, I don't want to check duplicates, then unfortunately there's nothing we can do to manage that, but the system will by default check those based on the person's name, as I said, in the same postcode, or now, as of the next update, we'll also check by the email address. So hopefully that should help us minimize our duplicates in the system. Okay, so I'll finish up now and we hand over to Murray.
Okay, so good morning, it's Murray here. I'm going to talk about duplicate record checking, which is where we look through your current donors and archive and prospects if you have them, and see if there are already any duplicates in there. As we've seen from Gary, if you're entering a new donor, you do get that automatic duplicate check, but if you ignore that, then you may end up with duplicates in your database. Also, if you import donors with one of our import programs, normally speaking, it has an interactive dedupe option there as well, but if you choose not to use that, it will import all of those donors and create the duplicates, but in the reports that it produces, it will actually show you any potential duplicates. However, if you choose to ignore those reports and not look for those duplicates, your database will typically end up with a number of duplicates there. Now, from time to time, it's a good idea to run the duplicate checking report just in case you have got any of those donors. So no matter how tight you are with getting rid of duplicates as you go, there may well still be instances where you do have duplicates there. The program will actually check the donors, archive and prospects file, both within those files and between those, depending on what you specify. It'll attempt to find possible duplicates based on different criteria that you can ask for. The report then would be checked manually, and depending on what options you've chosen and what the possible duplicates it's found, you would then do one of a few different things depending on the situation. If you find that you've got two donor records that are identical, you can use the Merge Duplicate Record program, and I'll talk about that just a little bit later, although that's not really part of the scope of this program. When we run this program, you need to be aware that it will only check individuals against individuals and non-individuals against non-individuals. So what that means is if you've got Fred Bloggs as an individual, that might be private or individual or whatever you call, but where it's him that's giving, if you also have a second record where he is perhaps the representative of a company and you have a corporate record, it will never match those two, because in one instance it's actually Fred Bloggs who's the donor, in the other instance it's the company that he just happens to be working for. Now, to run this duplicate checking program, we need to go to the housekeeping menu. So we'll go to housekeeping. Then over on the left-hand side, we've got the duplicate record checking menu. So we can now go into there. And the first option that we've got there is the duplicate checking of files. So we're now going to go into that, and this program can only be run on one PC at a time because it makes use of a temporary file, and if you have two people trying to update that temporary file, it's just going to go crazy. So it always asks you, are you running this program on another terminal? We're not, so we're going to say no. So now what we see is the actual program file itself, program screen. Before we can actually do any duplicate checking, we need to populate that temporary file with a list of names and addresses from the various files that we use. If we've only just generated it maybe half an hour ago, we wouldn't need to regenerate it unless we wanted to import or use a different set of people. But when you first run this, we do need to generate that file. So I'm going to say yes to the first question. And you can see here how we have the opportunity of checking just donors, prospects or archive, or in fact we can do them all. And in fact for donors and for prospect, rather than doing all of the donors or all of the prospects, we can use a subset of those by specifying a selection file. In our case, what we're going to do is we're going to look at all the files. So we're going to look at our donor file, our prospect file, and our archive file. So when this actually begins to run, what it will do, in this case, it will copy all of the donors, all of the prospects, and all of the archive into this temporary file with their names and addresses and phone numbers and other distinguishing features that we're going to be able to do a comparison on. Once it's done that, we can then tell it what criteria we wish to select or list potential duplicates on. Now when you first run this, if you haven't run it for a while, the suggestion would be put in the tightest criteria that you can put. So in that case what it'll be is, well, yes, we want to check for people with a similar name, we want to check for people with a similar address, a similar initial, and a similar postcode. Now the reason that I'm suggesting that is that if we relax some of those criteria, you might end up with a huge list of potential duplicates, of which perhaps only a few of them really are duplicates. Whereas by putting in a very tight set of criteria at the beginning, what we end up with is a list of possible duplicates who are the most likely to be duplicates. If we find that we've only got 3 or 4 duplicates there, then we can repeat this process, but perhaps relax some of that criteria. Now, having set all of those for, it's now actually going to skip the next line because the option of doing a search by or a duplicate check by phone number or by email is only available if we say no, we don't want to check for the address. So the first time that we run this, we're going to say yes to address, so therefore we can't check by phone number or email. If you have 2 people, let's say you've got Fred Bloggs and Fred Bloggs both at the same address, do you know whether it's the same person, or is it possible that it's Fred Bloggs Senior and Fred Bloggs Junior, his son? If they have a link between those using the relationships in Donman, then clearly they must be 2 different people. So now it says ignore possible duplicates that are linked by relationship codes. So I've said yes, because clearly if there's a relationship between 2 separate records, then you would expect them not to be the same person. The last question says, when this program ends, do you want to empty the temporary file? Now up the top we said yes, we want to generate that file. So I'm saying no here because I might want to go back in and use the same information, but perhaps just put different criteria in. Therefore, I don't want to go through the same process of regenerating that file, because if you've got, say, 100,000 donors and 50,000 archives and a whole heap of prospects, it might actually take some time to generate that file. So I've said no here. I'm now going to choose the print preview option, and because we have a very small database, it all happens very quickly, but of course on your real live data this might take a lot more time. What you'll see, now I'll have to scroll this across just a little bit, so well, I'll go across. Over on the far right hand side you'll see it's got either individuals, or a bit further down it's got non-individuals. So in the case of these individuals, you can see that it's actually comparing the name. So we've got 2 prospects here. We've got a Mr. John Begood at Wesley Street, Frankston, and we've got a Mrs. Jane Begood, 47 Wesley Street, Frankston. Now these are only prospects. You might say, well, rather than mailing to husband and wife, we only should have one. So you might actually just delete one record and perhaps make the other record Mr. John and Mrs. Jane Begood. Here we have a donor, Mr. Joe Bunker, at a particular address, and a prospect with the same name and probably basic details. So again, you would probably just delete the prospect. Here again, donor and prospect. If they're identical, you'd probably just delete the prospect, donor and prospect. Now, this one here is the one where over on the far right-hand side it says it's non-individuals. So you can see here the company is called Family Enterprises, same suburb there. And so we've got Marge Simpson. Well, in fact, this case we also have the same person's name. Now, in this case, this second record, there are no donations for them, but they might still have notes against them. They might have function records, pledge records, or something like that against this second record. So in this circumstance, if that was the case, you would merge those two records together. So when you do the merge, you would actually pick one record to keep and one record to delete. Now, when you do that, any associated records like notes, pledges, volunteer records, anything like that that's associated with the record you're deleting will be moved across to the one that you are keeping. However, details from the actual donor record itself will not be moved across. So if one of these said Mrs. M. Simpson, and that was the record that we were keeping, and the record that we were deleting said Mrs. Marge Simpson, you would want to update the donor that you're keeping with the extra details from the one that you're getting rid of. And when you actually run that duplicate merge program, it actually suggests that you take screen prints of the records that you're deleting, just so that you can update any of those required fields. Again, down here we've got, if we go across, these are now the individuals, and you can see we've got a Mr. Bill Gates and a Ms. Burntz, not obviously spelled, probably meant to be Bernice Gates there. And again, you could say, well, they're two individual people, we'll keep them separate, or you might decide to merge those and make it Bill and Bernice Gates. Now this goes on for a little bit longer, but essentially what you can do is you can work your way through this file, work out who you think really are in duplicates, and then decide what you're going to do. In this case here, we've actually got 4 people that it thinks might be the same. In this case, if you said, yes, they're all Beatrice donations, then you can merge each of these, the other 3 records, with the one that you want to keep. Okay, having worked your way through that, you might say, okay, that's fine, but I'm sure I've got more people in there that I need to check. So what we're going to do now is we're going to run through the duplicate check again. We say, no, we're not running it on another machine. This time, because I've only just recently generated that data and I haven't made any changes at this point, I'm going to say, no, don't generate the file, and it then just skips over all of these 3 options here because the file is already built for us. So I'm going to say similar name, but now if I say similar address, no, I now have the option of either doing a duplicate check by phone number, and if I say yes to that, then I can type in my prefix just in case some of the phone numbers have STD prefixes and some don't. Or if I don't do that, I can also say, yes, I want to check by email. So all of these things here, so they have to have a similar name, similar initial, similar postcode, but they also have to have a similar email. So if I run that now, and again I'll do a print preview, here's my report. So you can see we've got similar sort of people that we've come up with before, but now it should actually be potentially a different list of people there. Okay, so it's always a good thing to run this from time to time, especially if you're finding that you do have a number of people in there more than once. So just as a brief introduction, this second option in the duplicate record checking menu, the merge of 2 duplicate donor records, is where we would go to actually get rid of or to merge duplicate donors. You'll see there's some information here where it suggests keeping perhaps a screen print of the one that you're getting rid of. When you begin, essentially it asks you who are you getting rid of and who do you want to keep, who do you want to keep and who do you want to get rid of. There are a couple of gotchas when you run this. Certain records you can only have one of per donor. For instance, each person, each donor record can have a number of different pledge records, but they can only have one per pledge campaign. So let's say we have a member campaign that's set up as a pledge, and you have two records for the same person, and both of those have a pledge record for the member campaign. If you try and merge those two, you'll get partway through and realize that you can't have two pledge records for the same campaign. So it would actually stop and give you a warning message, and you would then have to go and fix that situation, probably by deleting one of those records. Other gotchas would be function records to the same function on the same day, or two volunteer records, one from each, that sort of thing. So that topic we're not going to cover today, but if you need any help on that, when you get to that situation, you can always ring for help. Okay, so that's it for the duplicate record checking. I'm now going to hand over to Andrew.
Are you with us, Andrew, on the audio?
Sorry, I had my audio off. I apologise. Thank you, Murray. I was just saying that if with all of these programs that look at duplicates, we're always going through housekeeping and we're going through the duplicate record checking menu. And Murray's taking you through the top two programs, the duplicate checking of files within your donor system, merging within your donor system. And what I'm going to take you through now are these three programs. Now, they may not all be on your menu, but if you're interested in any of them, we can always provide them for you. But this first one definitely will be the generic text file deduping. Now, these are all programs that enable you to take a text file and split that text file into two files. One, a list of files that are matched on your donor file that are already there, and a list of names that aren't matched, which can be very useful. One, some people use that to pre-look at things. Rather than run an import and then decide interactively, they actually do the dedupe on the text file so that they then only attempt to import the records they think are not matched. Other people use this because they are going to use a text file they've got somewhere else to do acquisition. But before they do the acquisition, they want to make sure that those names aren't already on the donor file, because there's no point in trying to do acquisition to your existing donors. So if you can get rid of the matched donors, you can then mail with much more confidence to the others and hope that you will turn some of those into donors. Now, for the purpose of the exercises I've done today, I've actually created a little Excel spreadsheet. And I mean, this is a text file that I'll be reading in, but I've read it into Excel, and these are names of people that have actually come out of the donor file. So in one sense or another, every one of these are duplicates. And we have their name, address, and we have their phone numbers, their phone home. And what I've done is I've gone through and deliberately changed some of the surnames so that on a surname address basis they won't match, but on a phone number they will. And you'll see some of the results you get from this. So first of all, generic text file deduping. The generic text file deduping is name and address matching. So the first question that you're asked by the program is, are you checking a comma or tab delimited file? Now, I'm doing a tab delimited file, and then you can go and find the file. And in my case, I've got the file, and I've got a file called train. Hang on. Test import dedupe.txt. So that's the text file equivalent of the Excel spreadsheet I've shown you. So I've read that in, and the first question to ask me after reading the file in is the file in uppercase? Because if it's in uppercase, it'll do a case conversion on it in matching, because in your donor file, your data will presumably be upper and lower. I certainly hope it will. if your file is in upper and lower, don't ever say yes, because case conversion is not always absolutely terrific, like ANZ Bank will become capital A, little n, little z. Then it asks, are there field names in the first row? In other words, should I ignore the first row because they're field names and not real names? So yes, we'll ignore it. And then we're being asked, are we deduping by surname or company? So is this a corporate list or an individual list? And in this case, it's a surname list. So then, because this is not part of our donor file, it's a text file. It doesn't know anything about this text file. So you have to tell it what fields there are in there that can be used for deduping. So the first question is, which field is the surname field? So if I was to type 3 there, no, it's not street. Number 1 is the first name field. No, number 2. Okay, number 2 is surname field. Street line 1, we're matching by surname and address, so it doesn't need to know about first name. All it's going to look at is surname and address and postcode. So street line 1 is suburb. Street line 2, no. That's going to be, let's say, 6. No. So street line 1 should have been 2, 3, and 4. There is no street line 2, so we'll just give that a miss. Suburb is 5, 4, and state 6. 5, state, and postcode 6. There we go. So that fumbling is pretty well what you'll go through. There is an option. You can, in fact, click on the help here and look at records from the file. And that's what I should have done to have got the right answer. And that would have made it a lot easier for me than doing it in that fumbly way. Now, when you want to look at those records, because this has got a header row, it's only showing me the headings, which is very useful when I'm displaying it, but I can click through here and actually look at my data to make sure that it's correct. So then it asks me, do you want to split your file into matched and non-matched records? I can't imagine a situation where you'd say no, unless you just simply wanted a report to know how many duplicates there were. So I'm certainly going to say yes, and it's then asking me, for records not matched, do you want to do an interactive check by name and postcode? And I recommend you do, because the exact match that it uses may miss some, and the interactive check may just get a few more. Now, there is a filter that you can add as well, and I'm not going to cover that, but that's if you're doing something very sophisticated. So I'm going to just say yes to that, and we're going to run our checking. Very quick, and it found 116 record and no dupes, which is very exciting. Let me see, what have I done wrong? Surname, street, line 2, 4, no. I think I had the fields right. I'm not sure what I've done and why I don't have duplicates. Test import dedupe. It's the wrong file. What's it called? It's called sample text file for deduping. Okay, I'm in the wrong place. Okay, the right file. This time I'll do it correctly. Surname, street 1, street 2, suburb, state, and postcode. There we go. And now I have lots of duplicates, and it's showing me that it's picked Spielberg with Spielberg, so that all these duplicates are there. And it's worth noting that we have 19 duplicates in the first program. Now, of course, the ones where I've deliberately changed the surname won't be picked. But now I'm going to take you through a second program. This is text deduping by phone number. So it's only going to look at phone number. Very useful if you're doing telemarketing. So again, this uses the same file that Murray was talking about in the duplicative checking within the donor file. Now, the reason it does that, the reason it builds this special file, is when we're deduping by phone number only, we have to build a separate file because we've got the home phone and we've got the work phone, and we've also got mobile maybe. So we need to have one file that has all those in there together. So I'm going to say yes, we're going to create the file now. We're going to check the donor file. We're going to check the prospect and the archive file. It's tab delimited. I'll leave the file there so I get the right one. Now, This one is a little different. Last time we had to look for name and address. In this one, all we care about is the phone number matching. So the first question is, what is your local STD prefix, so that if there are no prefixes on phone numbers, it'll stick 03 in, because that's where I am. Yours may be different. And then what field number is the phone number? And yes, it's phone home, and I'm going to split them. And now I've got, and you can see the duplicate matching is by phone number, and it's showing where the matches are there. And it's found 15 duplicates. Now that's because there are many surnames that weren't matched, but 15 are matched by phone number. And as Murray said, sometimes by trying this deduping in multiple criteria, you can get some very useful things out of it. Now the last thing I'm going to show you, which will get less duplicates, is where we're saying, well, let's check by both surname and phone number. So we're going to, again, use the same text file. This time STD prefix and phone number field just as we did before, but we're also building in surname now. So surname is now part of a deduping. So now what I would expect and what we've got is dupes 19 less than we've got the first time, because we're saying not only does the surname have to match, but the first name has to match as well. In fact, we've got the same number, probably because all these records are from the donor file. Now, what we use these files, it's really up to you where you find it'll be most useful. The phone number deduping, I think, is really useful for telemarketing, and I think that probably at some point we may add an email version of this as well. So this is the various ways you can take a text file, dedupe it, and then use the matched file or ignore the matched file and use the non-matched file to either import into your donor file or to mail. Now I'm going to hand over to Murray now, who's now going to look at the last thing, which is deduping selection files.
Hi, it's Murray again here. What we're going to have a look at now is deduping of selection files. Now, this is quite different to everything that we've done so far. And before I begin, I'd just like to point out a couple of things. First of all, for those who aren't that familiar with selection files, a selection file is just a list of donor numbers. There's no phone numbers, there's no names and addresses or anything like that in it. It's just donor numbers. And in this case, when we're deduping selection files, all we're talking about is getting rid of the same donor number if it's in more than one file. Now, if you have duplicates on your database and you've got two records for Fred blogs, record number 1 and record number 100, what I'm about to discuss here will not actually get rid of both of those or one of those. It will simply say, well, 1 and 100, they're different records or different donor numbers, so it's happy to do that. So you're not actually going to get rid of duplicate donors. You're going to get rid of the same donor record from multiple files. Now, you need to do this in a number of different circumstances. Quite often when you're doing an appeal, you might split your database up into several different segments. For instance, you might have one letter that you want to mail out to your corporate donors. You might have another mail that goes out to your recent donors, people that are given money, say, within a particular period of time. And you might have a third letter to go out to those people that live in the nearby area, maybe a certain range of postcodes. Now, clearly it's possible, given that set of criteria, that a donor record might end up in all 3 or maybe 2 of those files. But obviously you don't want to send 2 or 3 different letters to the one person, because A, it's a waste of your time, and it's certainly going to confuse them that you're asking for 3 different things. So what we're going to be doing here is we're going to look at ways of getting rid of that. Now, if you're familiar with the Donor Appeals program, if you can generate your selection files, all 3 of them in this case, that way, then you can either set up the criteria so that they're not, there's no overlap. So your first file might be your corporate donors. The second set could be the recent donors, but you could exclude corporate. And then your third one could be your local donors, and then you could exclude anyone that's given recently and that has is a corporate donor, or you could run several selections in one go and get rid of the duplicates that way. But there are circumstances where perhaps you're not generating the selection files using the standard donor appeals program, and therefore you don't have that same ability to dedupe as you go. There are other situations where you might wish to dedupe files where you've generated a couple of selection files, maybe by using lots of different programs, and the actual group of people that you want to send to is somehow manipulated based on two or more of those selection files. So it might be a case of I have one group of people, say, whose pledge for membership pledge is due in July, and then you might also have another selection file of your volunteers. And when you send the reminders out, you don't want to send a reminder to your volunteers because you want to do something different for them. And so we would therefore need to dedupe those files so that when you send the reminder letter out to your members, it didn't send a reminder to your volunteers. Now, I've set up some files, 3 selection files, which based on our little trial database here. I've got the first one, which is called First 10, and that, as you might guess, are the first 10 donor numbers on our system. So that's donors 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 10. The second selection file I've got is called Even 20, and that's actually all the even numbers between 2 and 20. And then I've got another one I've called Threes, and that's basically all the numbers from 3 up to 30 that are divisible by 3. So clearly there are certain numbers in each of those files that will overlap with others. I've also written a little visual reporter report that will actually show me the contents of the lookup file. Now, the lookup file is a temporary file where we can actually
Murray, sorry to interrupt you there. We're just seeing your homepage at the moment.
That's right. I haven't actually done anything yet.
Okay.
Sorry, I haven't done anything yet. I'm just sort of giving a bit of a background. I'll go into donor appeals. And then I go into the lookup selections. And at the bottom here, you can see this Murray's lookup report, and this will show me the contents of the lookup file at any stage. Now, that's just simply so we can see what the results of our working with the lookup file is doing. As I was saying, the lookup file is a temporary file, and we can essentially empty selection files into it by reading in the donor numbers, and we can also compare the contents of that file with the contents of a selection file. And by using those sort of two options, we can do a number of things. We can merge a number of files to make one big selection file, or in our case today we're talking about deduping, so we can actually dedupe several files. Now, what we're going to do, the first instance, because there's a couple of different ways that we can dedupe files here. In the first case, let's us assume that we've got 2 selection files, and we'll use First 10 and Even 20, and we want to dedupe those. Now, in one case, we need to determine which of those 2 files is the more important. If a donor record appears in both of those files, which file do we want to end up in? Let us assume that the first 10 is the most important. So if they're in that file, we want them to get the letter associated with first 10. Therefore, what do I call the other one? Even 20. If there's anybody in there that's already in first 10, we want to remove them from Even 20 so that they don't get 2 letters. Now, in this case, what we're going to do is we're actually going to read in Even 20 into our lookup file, and we do that by going into Generate Selection Lookup. Okay, so which file do we want to read in first? Well, the file that we're actually manipulating is going to be Even 20, so we're going to put that in there. Now, whenever we select a selection file, it's going to ask us how many records are in there. Even though I know that there should be 10 there, I'm just going to press enter and it will count them for me. And of course, if it said that there was 100, I know that I've got the wrong file because I'm only expecting 10. Okay, now I don't know what's currently in the lookup file, so I need to clear that file from whatever is in there at the moment. So I'll just say yes to clear the lookup file. And because I've effectively emptied that, it automatically assumes that I want to read these records in. That means that I want to add them to my lookup file, and that is the case. Now, because of the way that I've generated this selection file, I know that within that selection file there are no duplicates, so there's no point me checking for duplicates as I go. However, if the file that we're reading in may have duplicates, I could actually even get it to do a duplicate check here, and so that could then get rid of the duplicates within that file. That's not an issue at this point, so I'll just say no to that, and when I go enter to continue, it will read in those 10 records, which it has done, and they are now sitting in the lookup file. You can look at those by going into View Selected Records, and as I page down through them, it's only finding the records that I've got there. So you can see it's only got the even numbers there because that was the file that I read in. Just to show you my report, I'll just run this little report here. And again, you can see donor numbers 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, all the way through to 20. And it keeps track of which selection file they were read in from. Okay, so now that I've got my first file in there, I want to remove from that anybody that is in file first 10. Now to do that, I'm going to go to Generate Selection Lookup. I'm going to nominate my file, which is first 10. Again, it will ask me, and again, I'll get it to count. Now, I don't want to clear the lookup, otherwise that gets rid of all of those people that I've just read in, so I'm going to say no. It now gives me a choice here of reading that file in or deduping that file against what's already in the lookup. If I were to say read, it would simply try and add the records from first 10 into the lookup file, but I don't want to do that. I want to actually dedupe that file. So by saying D, what it's going to do is it's going to read through the file that I've nominated up the top here, first 10, and it's going to look and see if it can find those records in the lookup file. When it finds the first one that is a duplicate, it's going to give me a message, and we'll see that in a short while. So by saying dedupe, it automatically says, well, you obviously must want to check for duplicates. If I wanted to find out who those duplicates were, because sometimes the group of people that you want to mail to or do something with is actually the people that are in both files. If that were the case, I could go yes here, and I could give it a file name, I'll call it dupes or something like that, and that file that it builds here will be the people that are actually in both. We're going to ignore that anyway. So I press enter to continue, so it will begin to read that file in, and it's found from my file called first 10, the one that I'm reading in now or deduping, it's found that donor number 2 from that file was in even 20, which was in the lookup file, and the file that I'm reading in now. And it gives me two choices. I can delete or I can skip. If I say delete, what it will do is it will remove donor number 2 from my lookup file. And that's exactly what I want it to do because it's already in first 10. If I were to say skip, it would make no change whatsoever to what's in the lookup file. And if you were actually just trying to find out who is the duplicate between them, you might say skip, but in our case we're going to say D for delete. So that is now run, and at the end it should tell me how many it's deleted, and of course as we should have worked out, it's deleted 5. Those records will be 2, 4, 6, 8 and 10. So if I press enter to finish now, I'll run my little report, and now you can see that the only even numbers left are 12, 14 through to 20. So those donor records for 2, 4, 6, 8 and 10, which were also in first 10, have now been removed from the lookup file. However, at this stage, nothing with the original file has changed. All of the changes at this stage are just in the lookup file. So in order to create the file that we're actually after, I go to Make New Selection from Lookup. And at this point, I would simply nominate the file that I want to create. So I could overwrite the original and I could do even 20, or I could create a new file name with, I'll call it results or something like that. I'll choose to do it in alphabetical order, and that will simply create a new selection file, in this case called results, with 5 records in there. Okay, so that's just the results. Okay, now that's fairly easy to do where you've got a couple of files. Maybe if I had 3 files, let's call them A, B, and C, we can deduplicate A against B, A against C, and then B against C. But if you've got a large number of selection files, that then becomes impractical because you're doing a lot of manipulation, there's a lot of room for missing one out or doing something a little bit wrong. So the second way that I'm going to show you for deduping is the best way for doing it when you have multiple files, like 3, 4, 5, or 6. So in this case, I'm going to use all 3 files. Now, what we end up doing for this one is we read our files in to the lookup file, and we just keep adding those files as we go, and we do this in the most important order through to the least important. When we ran it just before, we actually ran the least important, the even 20 in, and we then deduped against the most important. Whereas in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to add those to the lookup file from the most important through to the least important. So again, I'm going to go into generate selection lookup. I'm going to type in first 10 because that's my most important selection file, and if a donor is in that file and in others, we want them to stay in that file. Again, I'll let them count them. Now, I'm going to clear the lookup because I want to start from scratch again. It's automatically assumed dedupe. I don't need to check for duplicates, so I just simply read those in. And that's now finished, and when I run my report, you can see donor numbers 1 through to 10. I'm now going to read in the next most important file, which is even 20, if I can type it properly. Again, there's 10. I'm not going to clear the lookup file, and I'm going to say I want to read these in. So these are going to be added to the database, to the temporary file, and I'm going to say, yes, I need to check for duplicates because there is potential overlap between even 20 and first 10, but I'm going to say, no, I don't care who those duplicates are. And again, when it finds the first record, it gives me a choice. Now, in this case, it's slightly different than before. This time, I can say retain this donor, which means it will bring it in for a second time into my lookup file, and they'll be in there twice. I don't want to do that. I want to say skip. So I say skip, and at the end, it should tell me that it skipped 5 records. Okay, it has done that. All right, so that's now my second most important file, and if we look at the results so far, you can see I've got 1 through to 10 from even 20, from first 10, and then we've got 12 through to 20 from my even 20 file. I'm now going to read in the third file, which is my 3s, I've called it. So again, I'm not going to clear the lookup file. I'm going to read those. I am going to check for duplicates. I don't care who those duplicates are. And again, when it comes up with a duplicate, it says, what do I want to do? So I'm going to skip those. And again, at the end, it should skip maybe 3 or 4 or something. I'm not sure. 5, okay. All right, so let's have a look at the results at this point in time. Okay, so we've got 1 through to 10, which came from first 10. We've got 12, 14, 16, 18, and 20 from the file even 20. And then I've got 15, where we go, 15, 21, 24, 27, and 30 from the file called 3s. Now again, none of these files, these selection files, have been altered at this stage. What we're now going to do is we're now going to write those files back out with the results. So when I go to make new selection from lookup, if I actually wanted a combined list to make one big file, I would just nominate that here. It's very similar to what we did last time we came in here. But if I leave this blank, you will see it comes up with a message. It says this will create multiple selection files, it should say, from the lookup using the original selection file names, and will overwrite the original selection files. Do you really want to do this? So I'm going to say yes. What order? I'll do it alphabetical order. Press enter. Now what it's doing is it's going to write back to the original file names those files that they came from. So again, if I look at my report here, first 10, because that was my most important, it will get exactly the same donor numbers that it had in the first place. So it effectively remains untouched. Even 20 has lost 2, 4, 6, 8 and 10, and it now only has 12, 14, 16, 18 and 20. And then even, threes will have 15, the same ones we had before. So again, there will be 5 of those. So if we were to look now at those selection files, they would actually now be completely deduped. No donor number would appear more than once in within those 3 files. So where you do have a large number of selection files that you need to dedupe, that is the best way to do that. Okay, so that's it from me at this stage. I guess I'm handing back to Marla at this point, and we will now field any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Murray. So as we said earlier in the session, if you do have any questions that you'd like to ask, please enter them on the question pane, or if you pop your little hand up, there's a little hand icon on your name there, and we can open the lines up for you to ask that question directly. So if you're happy for me to start, Andrew, Gary and Murray, we do have a couple of questions that have already been posted. Are you right for me to start?
Yep. Yes, I'm right. Yep, great.
Okay. I'm just going to take the controls back to Andrew so he can show them. Okay, so the first question was from Diana. I think I've got her name right. Is there a way to do multiple duplicate merges at once? That was from earlier in the session. I think it was when Gary was presenting.
I think it was actually when I was presenting.
Yeah.
So Diana's asking, is there a way to do multiple duplicate merges at once?
I'm not sure what she means.
I
Do you mean
probably? I would think it's probably a case of where you've got 3 or 4 donors who are the same person. You can't actually merge them all at once. You've got to merge one with the one that you keep, and then the next, and then the next.
There is a program somewhere that will let you merge duplicate donors from a text file. So that, for example, you could have a text file that had donor 1, donor 6, donor 4, donor 5, donor 8, number 27. Like on every line there are 2 donor numbers, and then you run this program and it goes and just merges them. But you've got to be really sure that you've got that file right, because you could do all of the damage with it. But that's the only way I can think of doing that, to automate the process. But generally it's one at a time.
Okay. From Bronwyn, does the dupe against email address show the email address in the report?
Bronwyn, it's not a report. It's not a report. Are we talking about the interactive duplicate checking?
I'm not sure. Sorry, Andrew.
So, yes.
I think so. I was just going to say that you can choose what fields are displayed in the finding duplicate screen. So if you add email to the fields that you normally have displayed, you will see them. But we will be adding that to make that one of the default fields, so you won't have to manually add it.
Okay. Sorry, we've just got a couple of people who've got issues with sound there. Hopefully they're back online with us now. From Genevieve was, is there any scope to have a section that allows you to dedupe by surname and date of birth, or even user-defined deduping? For example, using a user-created field to dedupe by that specific to your organisation.
Look, there's always an option for text file deduping or custom programs. But if you're talking about the interactive deduping, no, it takes a lot of programming to get deduping going. And when we decided to add the email deduping, we had to add an index to the donor file, prospect, archive, and address file on email address. It's actually quite a major task. So to add new options to interactively dedupe would require new indexes. It's, again, custom program to do it, but not the interactive will pretty well be the similar name and address and email. I mean, the problem with deduping by date of birth is most people don't have date of birth there.
Carol had a question. Is the general text file deduping checking for duplicates in Donman and the general text file?
It's looking at every record in the text file and seeing if any of those records are already in the donor file, prospect, or archive file.
But
it's not
deduping within it.
It's not checking within the text file at all. No, it's just looking at each record and seeing whether there is a duplicate.
Okay. Susie's got her hand up, so I might just open the line to Susie to see if she wanted to ask a question. Over to you, Susie. No? Okay. Melanie also had a question, so I'll open the line to you, Melanie, now if you'd like to ask that question. And that would be a no as well. We'll go on. There's a number of questions that have been posed. So
they mightn't have microphones.
That might be the case, yes. Might be. Did try unmuting them, but no luck there. So, okay, the next question was from Ranjit. Please explain about donor filter in the generic deduping file. I believe that was during your section, Andrew.
It was, and I thought I'd successfully ditched that, so I wouldn't have to remember what it was for. Let me think. Anybody else remember? Link and duplicate record checking, generic text file deduping.
Down the bottom left.
Yeah, I've got the thing. I'm trying to remember what it's doing. Maybe it's saying it's only going to check against donors that have a particular criteria. So you might say, well, I only want to check against corporate donors or only donors in a certain suburb. If you've got a huge database and you think you might get too many duplicates, that's all I can think of. Anyone else got any ideas? But I think that would be it.
Okay.
We must have had a reason to put it in there. And I think that's it, just to be able to limit what records it actually looks at. A bit like when you do the interactive duplicate checking, not the interactive, sorry, the duplicate checking that I think Murray showed, which was the program that lets you dedupe. You had the option of saying, well, instead of doing the whole donor file, let's do it for just the selection file. Now, when you're doing, in this case, with a text file, you don't have that option, but the filter sort of gives you that option to reduce which records you're going to look at.
And it will be just donors.
Yes.
Okay, from Tony, there's a question. If you dedupe a selection file or files, does it delete the record from the donor file?
No. All you're doing is deduping the selection file and creating a couple of files of matched and non-matched.
Sorry, he was talking about selection files, wasn't he?
Oh, selection files. Sorry.
Is that correct,
Yes,
Marla?
if you dedupe a selection file, does it delete the record from the donor file?
No, it doesn't. All it's doing is manipulating selection files. There's no change whatsoever to any of the donor records or archive or whatever.
Okay. And from Sue, how can I put a report shortcut on the selection file menu as Murray had?
I don't know whether it's in yet. Let me just see. No? It's coming. There will be an option. There will be an option in the next service pack where you'll be able to right-click and add a visual reporter file to the user menu. Unless it's already on the user menu. No.
Will you be able to do it for normal menus though, Andrew?
No, you will only be able to add them to the user menu, because the problem is if you could add them to normal menus, the normal menus will get clogged and we wouldn't be able to add things. Plus the normal menus have a limit of 20 items per menu, whereas the user menu is unlimited. So you'll be able to write.
Good. So to answer Sue's question, if you want to do it now, you'll need to ring us up and ask for help, because you'll need a password to get in and modify the menu.
That's right, but in the next, from the next service pack you won't have to. You'll be able to add it yourself.
Okay, the next question was from Gemma. What is the best solution for merging two donors but both are pledged donors?
Well, I guess it a bit depends whether they have similar pledge records. If they have identical pledge records, you won't be able to actually merge the two together. Now, the problem is that the pledge record in some cases will have information. So if they've paid certain number of pledge records from one donor record and some from the other, the actual pledge records, the duplicate pledge records, will actually have details. And while it's easy, we could just simply delete one of those pledge records, that pledge record then really wouldn't have the total sum of what's in that. So it essentially needs to be edited manually. So things like the number of donations given and the total given, which can't normally be updated, you would need to talk to us about how we can actually correct those things. If one of the pledge records hadn't been used, you could simply delete it before you did the merge.
I think that brings up a really good point, that what we might build into the pledge program is an option called rebuild totals. And if we rebuild the totals, it'll be pretty easy, because all you'd have to do is go to the donation records and look at every donation for that pledge and count them, and that would give you how many times they've paid.
Mm-hmm.
And how much they've paid. So we could probably look at doing that in the next update.
Speaking of which, Carol's asking, when will the next service update be available?
We've just done this one.
Hopefully Carol's gotten the latest one. Yeah. If anyone does have any more questions, we're still here for a little bit if you do have any questions. That was the end of the questions so far. So Carol does have the latest service pack, she's saying. So we'll just leave it, and of course all your questions are logged, so if there's any further follow-up needed, we can certainly do that offline today as well. So we might leave it at that, gentlemen. Sorry, go ahead. Can I
just say one thing? If there is something that's vitally important to you, and that question about when's the next service pack, we're always after people to test stuff for us. So if you have a particular need for something, give us a ring. Maybe we can make it available to you early for you to test it for us.
Great. Okay, well, thank you, Andrew, Gary and Murray, for today's webcast, and thank you everybody for joining us on this early morning webcast. We normally run them later in the day, so we are pleased that you could join us this morning. As you probably know, we do run the webcast every month, so look in your inbox for details of our July webcast. That will be coming out shortly. And also just a reminder, we do post the recordings of these webcasts to our website and also posted in our newsletter. So if you'd like to re-watch and listen to a recording of one of our previous webcasts, you can do so via the website. So we'll end it there for today. Thank you again for joining us. I don't have the date for the next webcast, Melinda's just asking now, but we will send it to you shortly. So it will be in our newsletters and on our website. So that concludes our webcast for today. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great day. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye all.